Hello everybody. In this video we're going to take a look at creating a pendulum and then animating it. And for those of you that have had me in the CMT 121 course, Maya Foundations, then some of this will be review and some of it will be new information for you. So the first thing I'm going to do to create my pendulum is create the base for it. And I'm going to start with a simple polygon cube. Now when you create your pendulum, you can create it with any of these polygon primitives that you want, as well as you could model your pendulum. And I'll be showing you how you can rig that up in the next video. But for this one, we're going to keep it very, very simple. So I'm going to go ahead and scale my base for my pendulum up some. And I think this will work. Again, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. And now I'll start creating the links for my pendulum. And again, you can use whatever polygon primitives you want. I'm going to be sticking with cubes for this example. And I'll place it, about here. I'm going to go ahead and name this. I'm going to name, in fact, all the objects in here. So I'm going to call this one base, and I'll call this one link 01 because it's going to be the first link in my chain. Now the question is here, where do we want this to rotate from when we animate it? And right now you can see that if I were to animate this, it's going to rotate from its center. But because we have to imagine that this part of our pendulum is attached to the base here, we actually want it to rotate from up here. So to accomplish that, I need to move this object's pivot point. And there are two buttons on your keyboard that you can use if you have a PC. You can either press Insert or the D key. And you can toggle out of this mode also by just pressing that button again. If you're working on a Mac, then you have to use the D key because you probably don't have an insert key on your keyboard. But once you're in this mode, you can move your pivot point anywhere you want, anywhere in your environment. For instance, if I moved it here and then press D again, my object's pivot point is now far off of the actual mesh, and if I rotate it, it rotates like this. Now we actually want it to pivot from right here. So I'm going to press D on my keyboard once again, and I'm going to move my pivot point so that it's right at the base, right here. And as you can see, this is now going to rotate just like I want it to. Now that I have my first link and I've named it link 01 or link 01, and I've moved its pivot point, this makes it very convenient because now if I do Control D and duplicate it, you'll see that not only is the pivot point in the right place, but conveniently it's also naming it. We have link 02 now, so we've got link 1 and link 2. I'm going to go ahead and move this up here. I'll make a third link and I'll move it down. And let's go ahead and make a fourth link for this. Okay, so now I've got the links for my pendulum. They are 4 pieces of geometry. The next thing that I'm going to want to do is perhaps create the weight at the bottom of my pendulum. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and use a sphere which I'll bring down to the bottom here. I'll scale it to the size that I want. Maybe move it up a little. I'm just going to call this weight. And one thing to keep in mind, again, is its pivot point. So right now it's rotating from its center, but it being a pendulum, I think that I will probably choose to move the pivot point up here. I'll press D once again on my keyboard to get out of that move pivot point mode. And now you can see that it's going to rotate from here for a very convincing swing. Now, if you've taken my CMT 121 class, you're familiar with this concept of hierarchies and parenting in Maya. And that's what we need to do now, because now you can see if I were to grab this base, nothing moves with it. What I want is to be able to move the base and then have the pendulum follow along. In fact, each one of these pieces, and I think what I'm going to do is maybe scale these down a little so you can see the gaps with them. Let me make sure I select all of them. We'll just scale them in a little bit so that you can actually see these gaps here. For the sake of this demonstration, I think visually it'll be good for you to be able to see that, so that's why I've done that. I need to do the parenting. Now we're going to run into a problem here, and for those of you, once again, that have had me in my 121 class, you know what that problem is going to be. But I'm not going to fix it yet because I just want us to take a look at it really, really quickly. Now, here's a little bit of a refresher for ways that we can do the parenting. Typically, the easiest thing is to start out with the bottom of the hierarchy, although that is not absolutely necessary. And what you can do is you can select it and then shift select what is going to be its parent. In this case, link 4. And then I can go to Edit, Parent. Now notice also that there's a hotkey for this, and that hotkey is P, and we're going to use that for the next link, for the next example. But I'll go ahead and click that to parent it. And you'll notice now that this ball, this weight, is actually nested underneath link 4. I don't see it in my outliner, but if I click on this plus symbol, there it is nested underneath. In fact, it's indented as well to indicate that it is a child of link 4. Okay, let's do the next parenting. We will select link 4 and we want to parent it to link 3. So once again, I can hold down Shift, click so that I have them both selected. This time I'm not going to navigate to Edit Parent. Instead, I'm going to use the hotkey of P. Type P and it does the same thing. Once again, it's nested underneath its parent now. Link 3 is the parent. If I were to expand on this plus symbol here and then expand on the link 4 plus symbol, you'll see weight is nested under link 4, which is nested under link 3. Now, if I were to move link 3, everything underneath it moves with it. However, if I move link 2, it's still independent. We still need to do some more parenting. So let's take a look at another way to do the parenting, and that is to simply drag in your outliner here. So I can take link 3 and I can middle mouse drag it into link 2. I'll take link 2, middle mouse drag it into link 1, and finally I'll take link 1 and middle mouse drag it to the base. Now, you'll see in the outliner, it looks like we just have a base. However, there is a plus symbol here indicating that there's something underneath it. If I click on it, you'll see it's link 1. And under link 1 is link 2, and so on. I'm going to collapse that and show you an easier way to expand the whole hierarchy, and that is to hold down Shift and then click on the plus. And now we can see our whole hierarchy. Weight linked to link 4, which is linked to 3, and then 2, and then 1, and the base. And if I move that base, everything moves with it. So here's where we're going to end up with a problem. And again, for those of you who have had my 121 class, you know what it's going to be. Let's take a look at it. Now, if I rotate the base, everything looks good. If I rotate this next link, we get this weirdness happening. You can see that everything gets skewed. It's not behaving as we would expect. In fact, on all these links underneath, we're going to see that it's not going to give us a predictable result. So why is that happening? Let's take a look. The reason why is, I'm going to select the base, that we have this information here on our scale. Currently, it's scaled 10 on the X, 3.5 on the Y, and 3.5 on the Z. And that is what's causing the skewing on everything underneath it. We can very quickly and very easily fix that by getting rid of this scale information, setting it back to its default, of 1, 1, and 1. And to do that, I'll just select this base here, and I will go to Modify, Freeze Transformations. And if I click on that, you'll notice now that that base, the scale data has all been set back to its default values of 1, 1, and 1, and now this should work out fine. Now, one other thing to keep in mind before I go any further, though, is that because all of these objects here are a child of this base, when I froze the transforms on this base, it also froze the transforms on all of its children. So let's test it out. Before we actually start animating it, we should test it out. And as you can see, I can move it around just fine. I can rotate it just fine. But also, each one of these consecutive links, if I select them individually, I can animate them individually. Let's start from the bottom here. You can see I can rotate this. It's happening just fine. It's not skewing any longer. This is rotating well. This is rotating well. This is rotating well. And this is rotating well. They're all doing just fine. If I select all of them and then just zero out their rotations, we can bring it back to its default rotation here. One other thing to take note of, this is something that oftentimes confuses students. I'm going to select this first link here and I'm going to rotate it. Okay. I'm going to select these here and then I'm going to rotate it. And what I want you to notice is that it's rotating very differently. Oftentimes students get confused with this. I show this method of animating all the links in the chain, and then a student will select the first link and rotate it and wonder why it doesn't behave the same way. Here's what you need to take note of. Look at the outliner when I make these selections. Look at the outliner. So right now, I have nothing selected. I'll select the first link in my chain. Now what you'll notice is that it highlights everything underneath the chain, which can be confusing. Oftentimes beginning students will think that because everything is highlighted, that it's all selected. But in fact, the only thing we currently have selected is this link right here. And that's why if I rotate it, it only rotates it. Everything else remains stiff here. On the other hand, if I select everything here, with the exception of the base, you'll notice that now I have link 1, 2, 3, and 4 selected and the weight at the bottom. And if I rotate it, I get this. So we'll go ahead and start animating this now. I'm going to create an animation that is representative of what I want you to do with your pendulum. While I'll talk through probably the beginning of the process, I'll then speed up the video as I animate it. Because I, for one thing, don't want you to animate yours just like mine. It's an activity where you really do need to be thinking through the process as you animate instead of following what I say step by step. The important thing is that you understand how to set keys and how to manipulate the animation curves that you have in the graph editor to get the effect of this pendulum swinging. Okay, so the first part of the animation is going to be of the base moving. And what I'm going to do is set a key on frame 1 on the base. And then for this example, perhaps I'll have it take a full second and move over here. And then I'll key that. So now if we play this animation, let's see what we have. And there it is. Maybe I'll speed that up a little bit. Maybe I want it to happen more quickly. So I'll go ahead and take the key that I have on frame 24, and I'm going to shift click so I can select it in this timeline here, and I'll just move it over a few frames. So now it'll take maybe a little, roughly half a second. And I think that's pretty good. Maybe I don't want it to start right at the very beginning. Sometimes it's good to have a little bit of, in your animations, maybe a little bit of time at the very beginning to give your audience a little bit of time to get settled in, to get ready, prepared to see the awesomeness of your pendulum animation. So maybe I'll go ahead and shift select the whole animation, move it over. So then we'll have a little bit of time leading into the animation here. So now if I play this, you'll see it will be still for about half a second, and then it'll take half a second to move over. And I think that's pretty good. So now that we have it moving, we have the base moving, the question is, what is the pendulum going to do in response to the movement of the base? And this is where follow through, overlapping action, that's where this will come into play. And that is one of the 12 principles of animation, follow through, overlapping action. That's what's going to cause the pendulum to swing. Now currently my base is animated, but that's the only thing that's animated. If we go to Windows Animation Editor's Graph Editor, you'll see that here's the movement we have on it. It has a slow out and a slow in at the base. This makes it maybe a little bit more realistic because most things accelerate and then slow down rather than going from 0 to 60, let's say, in no time at all. It takes a little while for a car to speed up. It takes a little while for a car to brake as well. And it's the same with most things out there in the real world. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this slow in, slow out in here. We could exaggerate it further if we wanted, but I'm going to go ahead and just leave this at its default setting and start animating. So let's take a look then. What's going to happen? We've already animated the base. I'm going to go ahead now and select the links and the weight at the end of my pendulum. You can see if I expand on the base here that that's what I have selected. I currently do not have the base selected. I only have the pendulum that is attached to the base selected, each of the links as well as the weight. So let's see what is going to happen. So nothing happens while the base is static. As soon as it starts to move, then the pendulum is going to respond. So I'm going to go ahead and key them on frame 12. And then they're going to come to frame 24, and perhaps at that point they will start reacting to it like this. As the base moves forward, these will take a little longer to follow. So maybe I'll put it about here, and I'll key that. So now if we scrub in our animation, you'll see that we get this follow-through overlapping action where not everything happens at once. Not everything happens at once. The base moves, and then the pendulum follows after. It will come to a stop, and then we'll start the swing of our pendulum. So when it comes to a stop, then obviously this is not going to stay static like that. It's going to swing over here like that. And I'll key that. And let's take a look at what we have. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. The base moves, the pendulum responds, the base stops, the pendulum keeps going. It swings, and then finally when it comes to, let's say, this apex here, it'll come swinging back. And I'll key that. Let's take a look at what we have. Okay. Now the question is, how many swings do we want to create before it comes to a settle, until it comes to a complete stop? I'm going to go ahead and work a little bit on my animation now, and I'll be speeding up the video. So I've done my initial first pass on my pendulum swinging animation. Let's take a look at it. I'll rewind it and play it, and we'll see what we have here. And already it's pretty convincing. Right now we're just using Maya's default slow in, slow outs, but it seems to be working quite well. We want that slow in here, and then we want the slow out as it comes swinging back. It speeds up, it comes over to here, another slow in, slow out, speeds up, and so on. That's what we want. In fact, we could even look at this, look at that slow in, slow out. If we were to come over here to visualize ghost selected, I'm going to reset this and apply. Oh, let me select an object first and then apply. And here you'll see how we have that slow in and slow out. If we swing this here like that, you'll see in these areas where, let me go back a little bit more, okay, that's good. You can see how it's going to come in, it slows in, that's why we see multiple of these spheres very close together, but then as it speeds up, they get further and further apart. Here is probably where it's moving at its fastest. In fact, we might be able to see that even better if we go earlier into the animation. Maybe we'll look at this first swing here. You can see how it's bunched up. These are bunched up here. But then as it moves and comes here where it's going to be moving its fastest, we've got the greatest spacing here. But then once again, when it comes here where it's going to have it slow in and slow out, they get bunched up again. This is a great way to visualize that concept of slow in, slow out. In addition, we're looking at another animation principle here, and that is arcs. You notice that this ball is not moving linearly. We've got this nice sweeping arc, and arcs is also one of the 12 principles of animation, very well illustrated with this example here. And then, of course, the other animation principle that we're really looking at with this pendulum animation is that idea of follow-through overlapping action, that not everything moves at exactly the same time. In this case, the base moves first and then the pendulum follows. The base stops, but the pendulum still has energy, it still has momentum, and it keeps on going. Follow-through overlapping action. So I'm going to get rid of this ghosting now. I'll just go back to visualize, and I'm going to say unghost all to get rid of that ghosting. Now, having done the first pass of this pendulum, and it's already looking pretty good, but it still can use some polish. The way that I would look at this animation typically would be to play it and look for places where you feel like maybe the animation is either unnaturally slowing down or unnaturally speeding up, or looking in this case for places where the momentum feels correct. You know, for instance, if I look at this, I think maybe this looks a little off when it stops here and then the ball goes. I might tweak that a little bit and maybe start making the pendulum swing a little bit earlier, because we've got that slow in with the base. So I think as it slows down, the pendulum actually might start swinging forward a couple frames earlier. That's just one example of something I might do, having played my animation here and looking for those areas where I can improve it and make it more believable. The other thing I would start doing is selecting the objects that are animated and going into my graph editor and looking at the animation curves and starting to adjust them. Either adjusting them by actually posing it a little differently here in my viewport, or adjusting them in my graph editor. So what I'm going to do now is once again speed up the video that you're watching so that I can just work with this a little bit. You can watch me work through it, but I'm not going to be talking through it. So I worked a little bit more in my pendulum animation, just some fine tweaks, but I do think it is looking better. What you may have noticed as I was working on it is that I did adjust the uh, animation curves in my graph editor. I adjusted them not only on their value, but also on their timing. What I did was I made the swing here start a little bit earlier. It starts swinging here, even though the base hasn't come to a complete stop yet. I just thought that would look a little better, and I think it does. Uh, so yeah, here's what I have so far. And in case MonoSnap is skipping frames as I record this, I'm going to go ahead and create a play blast, which again is something I recommend that you all do to really truly be able to evaluate your animations and make sure that they are that it is animating the way that you intend. So, oh, and maybe before that, I'll just mention, you may have also noticed that I deleted these keys on these channels on these controls, on the translate X, Y, and Z, rotate X and Y, and the scale, as well as visibility. Why? Because I didn't animate those channels. I didn't animate them, and I thought that it would be easier for me working with this pendulum, as well as easier for you watching me animate it, if we only had to concentrate on this one single channel on rotate Z, because that is in fact the only thing that is animated on all four of the links and the weight. The base is the only thing actually that is animated on the translate X, but currently we actually don't have it animated on any other channel other than translate X as well. So to create my play blast, this will be a little bit of review from previous video. I like to take a look at the actual borders um, of my work. You can see that I can zoom in a little bit more because I've got all this space here. So if I really want to do a good job evaluating my animation, maybe I'll compose this a little differently. I don't really want it cutting into the pendulum there, so I'll move it over again. This is getting there. Let's see, I think that this could be good for evaluating this animation, so I'm going to leave it positioned there. I actually don't want this border here on my play blast, so I am going to uncheck that so that we're not seeing it. Maybe I don't want this grid in here, so I'll go ahead and go to Show and hide the grid. Now, do I want to have my pendulum selected? Because if I have it selected as a play blast, it's going to be selected in my play blast as well. It'll be highlighted like this. I don't think I want that, so I'm going to go ahead and deselect it. And then I'll create my play blast by going to my timeline, right-clicking, go to play blast, open up its tool settings here. And currently we have it set to from render settings, and that's what I want. That way it'll take the borders of what I actually have set up in my render settings here. Scale 1, that's what I want. It's checked to save the file. That's perfect. That's what I want as well. And now I'm going to browse to where I will save it. I want it somewhere where I can easily find it. I'll go ahead and save it in my project in CMT223 movies. That'll be a convenient place to find it. Give it a name, save it, and we'll apply. And here's my finished play blast. So if you use the tools and techniques that I use to create my pendulum and you animate it using those techniques, you're going to be able to get some very nice results. However, I'm going to show you now a couple more advanced techniques. You don't need to use these advanced techniques for what you'll be turning in for this assignment, but if you want even more control, let me show you how you can accomplish that. So I'm going to select, once again, I'm going to select the links and the weight in my pendulum here, and I'm going to open up the graph editor. So what we're going to be taking a look at actually is the slow in, slow out that we have. In fact, let's do it on the base first. We'll stick with just the base and take a look at it and these techniques that we can use. So currently I have some slow out and I have slow in. So in other words, it doesn't move linearly. It moves, it comes out slowly, it gets faster, and then it slows down. Now, if we play it, you'll see that that is in fact the case. If we open up our graph editor, we can take a look at the movement here. Now the question is, if I want, I'm going to get rid of the rest of these keys just so that this isn't cluttered as I do this demo. I'm just going to cut them and get rid of them, so then we're only looking at this translate X. I didn't need to get rid of those animation keys, but they weren't giving us anything right now, so for the sake of simplicity, I deleted them. What if I want to increase the slow out and increase the slow in here? How can I do that? Well, based on what you've learned so far, this is going to be not difficult, but it'll require a little bit of work. So you know that you can take these handles and you can adjust them like this using your left mouse button. The problem is that if I do this, and it's not going to help to break this tangent here either, actually. I could break the tangent, but that's not going to help me here if I want to increase the slow out and increase the slow in here. Let's go ahead and just maximize this so you can see this a little bit better. I know it's a little hard to see this curve, but here it is. This is what it looks like. If I move the handle, I can change and I can get rid of the slow out, or I can get rid of the slow in, but I can't really increase the slow in or the slow out. The way that we could do that, based on what you've learned so far, is I could go to this middle area here and set another key on it. And then that would allow me to grab this handle, and then by adjusting that, I could increase the slow out and the slow in. You'll see that this will look a little bit, well, let's take a look at it in here and you'll see. Sometimes it's better to see rather than have it explained. So let's take a look and see what it does. And what you'll notice is that now it comes out more slowly. If we scrub in our timeline, you'll see it's moving very, very slowly. But then in the middle, it starts moving very quickly and then comes to a fairly quick stop, but still with some subtle slow in. So that's one way that you could play with the timing of this. Notice how it really looks like it's darting now very quickly. I'm going to return it back to the way it was. This is a perfectly acceptable way of doing this, just so you know. This is a perfectly acceptable way. Place a key in between your keys, adjust the handle to increase that slow out and that slow in. That's a perfectly acceptable way. But I'm going to delete it. Watch what happens to this curve when I delete that. It goes back to its default. Still has slow out, still has slow in, just not as extreme. If we play this again, you'll notice that it doesn't quite feel like it's darting as quickly. It's not quite as punchy an animation, but it still works. What I'm going to show you now is a more advanced technique to do that very same thing. So this time, instead of adding another key here in the middle to increase that slow out and that slow in, or to make that slow out and slow in more pronounced, what I'm going to do is select my curve, and I will go to curves, and let's see if we can find it. I'm going to make this into a weighted tangent. So when I make it to a weighted tangent, you'll notice that actually these handles have changed. They look different now. If I were to grab the handle, you'll notice that now not only can I move them like this, as we could before, I can also pull them out like this, or bring them in like this. This is a very convenient way to increase or decrease the slow in, slow out that we have here. So What I'm going to do is hold down Shift. That's going to lock it in this horizontal so that I'm not moving it up and down like this. And I'm going to pull the handle out like this. That's going to increase or make more pronounced the slow in. And I'll do the same here at the beginning. Holding down Shift, middle mouse, drag the handle like this. Let's make it really pronounced. Go a little bit overboard with it so you can really see what's happening here. What you're going to notice is that there's very extreme slow out and very extreme slow in, and here our animation curve is actually quite steep, so it's going to move really, really fast when it gets to more the kind of the middle of that movement there. Let's check it out. The timing is exactly the same still. What we're dealing with is the spacing. The spacing is different. In fact, if we select this and we go back to our visualize and ghost it, you'll notice as I scrub in my timeline that it's not moving very far initially. Here, it's moving a great distance because it's moving very quickly, so it's covering more distance over fewer frames. And then here we get that extreme slow in. I'm going to unghost that and scale it back. I think this is a little bit extreme, a little bit more than what I want to do. But I'll still leave it more extreme than what we were getting with our default. Perhaps something like that. And I'll play it. And I think I like that. What I'm going to do now is play around with the weighted tangents on the rest of these links as well and see what I can get. While I do that, I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video again. But remember, I'm simply going to be using the same technique I just used on the base, but I'll be using it on the rotation on the links of my pendulum. So I've created a new play blast after having played around with the animation curves and increasing the slow in, slow out on the swings. The difference is subtle yet noticeable. I hope you have enjoyed this video and thank you for watching.